You're a little taller. You want to sit over here?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Because I'm already set up. Plus, I'm supposed to be farther away so I don't get people sick. Yeah.
We're all going to come out of here 6.
That... No,
Wouldn't
that would
be the
a
worst thing in
downgrade.
the world.
I mean, I wouldn't die as soon, but
It's true, but...
I'd still have to go through the whole teenage years again.
But school would be a breeze this time.
God, school might be really boring. On the other hand, I could just ignore everything and work on my own projects.
That's right. And you can be you can run the school with your advanced brain.
I'm not sure that's how schools work.
No, but you could probably run the bullies somehow. I don't know. I don't know if you could argue with kids or not if you're smart. It doesn't work with adults. But you might freak them the fuck out if you're talking at them like a 30-year-old with a 6-year-old body.
You might be able to corral the nerd group.
That's
but
true.
Yeah, I don't think you're about to talk any nerds into not beating you up. So, let's introduce ourselves.
Hey, welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. This is Katrina Stanton.
This is Steven Zuber.
And this is Eneasz Brodsky. And today we are talking about the Sanity Waterline. Specifically, should we raise it? Can we raise it? And before we start any of that, I should probably introduce what the Sanity Waterline concept is.
Please do.
Okay. The Sanity Waterline is, coined by Eliezer, of course, is the idea that there is fundamental problems in society itself that has let us get to this point in how we think. The example he brings up, which I think might be slightly contentious, but not a bad example, is that of religion, that even if you were to get rid of all religion, and, to be less contentious, let's just go with creationism. We can all agree that young earth creationism is really past the pale, and there's no reason for anyone to believe that that's sane. The young earth creationism being the belief that the earth was created 6,000 years ago.
Are you sure you're not marginalizing the less wrong young earth creationist overlap there?
You know what? They can stop listening if they want, or they can continue, either way. So we'll take creationism. Even if you were to wipe out entirely the concept of creationism, which in America has a belief rating of something like 40 to 50%. Yeah.
Young Earth?
Yes, young earth creationists, 40 to 50% of people subscribe to it. So yeah, totally. The earth was created 6,000 years ago. Even if you were to wipe out that belief completely and everyone were to just have that erased from their heads and no one would think of it again, there is this problem in society that belief could arise in the first place, and it would be no more than a few months before something equally crazy swept through the country. Because there's a fundamental problem in how people think if thoughts like that are that easily and that widely accepted.
So what's the origin of this problem? I was just reading something that talked about our ancient brains.
Mm-hmm.
Our ancient brains that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, obviously longer than that, actually. And it evolved over 6,000 years.
Yes.
Are ill-equipped to handle our space age world.
They're very well equipped to handle running around the savannah.
Yeah, if that's what you want to do,
right? And making babies.
And they're only kind of okay with that. I mean, I guess they're optimized for false positives because you survive longer.
Okay. Well,
I wanted to bring in this quote at the top of that essay because I liked that a lot. It has that great Feynman-esque strategy of sounding complicated, but then you dissect it and it doesn't. So the post that we're kind of deriving this episode from is on Less Wrong, called Raising the Sanity Waterline. It begins, to paraphrase the Black Belt Bayesian, behind every exciting, dramatic failure, there is a more important story about a larger and less dramatic failure that made that first failure possible.
Beautiful. Beautiful sentiment right there.
I think it's... So, I read that the first time and I'm like, what is... Okay? What do you mean? And then he goes on to say, if every trace of... And we'll amend it to work with our own example.
If every trace of religion, but we're subbing creationism for our example here, was magically eliminated from the world tomorrow, then, however much improved the lives of many people would be, we would not even have come close to solving the larger failures of sanity that made religion possible in the first place.
So there's a larger and less dramatic example that made that first problem possible in the first place.
And in this case, sanity is, or the lack of sanity is the difference between what reality and what our brains perceive, or...
Not, I don't think it's just what our brains perceive, because there's very little supernatural to be perceived. It's the lack of ability to think through things and correlate thoughts in your head. I think the reason this is brought up as a lack of sanity in society in general, as opposed to individual people, is because it is so widely accepted. I'm reminded of I believe it was Neil deGrasse Tyson quote, where he was talking about the correlates between education and religion. And the more educated you are, the less religious you are as a populace. I believe he said with the high school dropout rate, it's around 70% belief. Once you get a high school degree, it drops to 60. Once you get a college degree, it drops to like 40. A graduate degree is down to 30. Keeps going through the list. He says the very top of educational attainment is the scientists who work in the elite academy. I believe it was the National Academy of Sciences. Yeah. And he said, and in there's only a 7% belief rate. And he goes, now some people bring this up to, point out that the more educated you are, the less you believe in religion. But what I really want to know is, what's up with that 7%?
I'm really glad you brought that up because I hate that he focuses on that.
They hate that. Why?
Because he makes, I guess looking at it through this lens makes it sound much more reasonable. I kind of took it to mean, because he doesn't like to be confrontational about religion.
Yeah.
And so I took it to mean where he's like, look, 7% of scientists are religious, but they're still doing science. So let's just, whatever. But no,
I always took it the opposite way that what is going on that even the most educated and intelligent people in society still have a 7% belief rate.
So, they're referring to theism or
both
of the poly or monotheistic.
There are some people that are just the vaguely spiritual, like I see patterns in the connections, but there are some people that are just hardcore scripturalists, even in those levels.
And probably somewhere on the spectrum between, like, oh, it must mean something that my phone rang right when I plugged it in, or something, the people who draw significance from coincidences.
Yeah. All
the way down to, like, I believe in ghosts, and then I guess, somewhere near the bottom is 6,000-year-old Earth. So.
Right. I don't think any of those, I don't think my phone rang, it's a coincidence, exists in the NAS people, but the fact that you can have this knowledge of how the world works and how you're supposed to gather evidence and correlate evidence in your head, but still have the special place in your head where all the tools that you have learned just don't get applied because it's special, is a unique failure. I thought that's what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying. Maybe that is just my interpretation of his words.
Isn't that the Stephen Jay Gould separate magisteria?
It is.
Can I dismantle? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please.
I just want to dismantle Gould's magisteria in one example.
One example?
Yeah.
Do it.
So it's a great way to, like, say, hey, look, we can stop arguing. Let's just, play in our own sandboxes. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, no one would be content with that. So, like, say the Shroud of Turin contains DNA that was proven to only have mitochondrial DNA and no, like, familial or no paternal lineage. There's no religious person on earth who wouldn't freak out and be like, see, that proves it. That was Jesus, and he didn't have a father, see? So, like, they're fine with saying...
Jesus did have a father, and that father was God.
Oh, yeah. But does he have 23 chromosomes that he submitted to Mary when he knocked her up without asking?
Why not? We don't know the details.
So...
Were you there?
What I'm getting at, though, is I would imagine that finding would be relished in the religious community as strong evidence of the divinity of whoever was wearing the Shroud of Turin, right? So, or at least, I think they would find a way to shoehorn it into, look, proof of Jesus being magic.
Yeah.
Only positive evidence.
Well, that's my point, right? So they're fine to say separate magisteria whenever we point out something that doesn't make sense, like you can't, come back 3 days after being killed, or you can't be born without a father. So.
Unless you're a non-mammalian.
Right. Well,
that's my biologist.
Are we bringing in the lizard people conspiracy theory into
so reptilians, any bird people out there, and definitely insect people. There's definitely a probability that they could be born parthenogenically without a father. Okay, back to your regular programming.
I liked your interpretation of Tyson's query there. Maybe because the only time I've seen him talk about it, he sort of stopped the conversation at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But if he had said what the next thing that came out of your mouth afterwards, which is what's going on there, that's really weird. Let's figure out what's going on there. I think I might have come to that way. I don't know why I took it the other way, but I think your interpretation's probably more likely.
Well,
and any beat cop knows how probability of evidence works. That's what, I don't know, maybe not a beat cop, but a detective at any rate, knows how to weigh, well, this means that this likely happened and this is just beyond the pale. And if they see a bullet casing on the ground and they see a guy with a bullet hole in his chest, they assume that the casing probably came from the bullet that shot the dude.
Well, it's not like it's not like they have to work to compartmentalize. That is the natural order of things. Is what you learn in one field sticks to that field, and it's difficult for people to generalize.
Yeah. And
generalize knowledge and learning.
And I believe that actually is Eliezer's point, that the sanity waterline, the general level of people applying their skills to everything in life, is so low that these ridiculous beliefs pop up even among people who shouldn't have these beliefs. And so it should be, in theory, fairly easy to raise the general sanity level in the population if we can just get people to apply these tools to all their thinking.
It will be so easy if we can just do this incredibly difficult thing.
Yeah. I think that's what I was going to say too. So that does sound like it would solve or go a long way towards solving some of the society wide rationality issues, but that's a rather hard task. There was a great anecdote. There was a talk at the 2014 Amazing Meeting. It was a panel discussion with Julia Galef, Dan Dennett, and two other people who I'm not familiar with, but we'll link to the talk in the description for this episode and on the website. And they discussed this very issue, can you teach rationality? And like most 45-minute panel discussions, they don't come to a consensus.
Okay.
But one of the panelists, I forget her last name, first name was Barbara. She talked about how she taught probability theory to a lot of her students, and they nailed it. You talking about drawing marbles out of urns, and they had it just fine. And I'm not sure, she didn't sound like she was making this a hyperbole, but she said the second that she switched the examples to M&Ms, all their skills fell apart.
Oh no!
And so if it's that hard to generalize colored balls from M&Ms, I think generalizing standard rational practices to everyday life might be a very arduous task indeed.
I think that's kind of what this episode is about, because you guys are saying like it's the most impossible thing, but how did we come to this, realization and get these skills? I read a series of blog posts on the internet.
It's a good thing we're perfectly sane, right?
No, I'm saying if all I had to do was read some blogs by a guy who could write entertainingly, it shouldn't be that hard to impart, right?
Did that cause you to lose your religion?
I'd lost my religion long before that.
What happened? So what happened when you read those blog posts? What did you generalize that to? That's what I want to know, Eneasz.
What do you mean, what did I generalize it to?
So we're talking about... You read those blog posts, you're like, sounds good to me. Right. Now, how did it impact your life and those other compartments that we're talking about? How do you use it in work? How do you use it, just on the day to day? How do you use it when you're doing physics? I don't know.
I don't actually use it at work because my work is fairly simple. I'm an accountant. It's all, basic math stuff. So I don't use it at work at all. I use it more in my day-to-day life and in how I think about things and assign probabilities to beliefs. Like, I think one of the major things before was I grew up in a very fundamentalist religion, and things were generally very black and white. This is good, this is bad, there's no in between, this is true, this is false, God created the earth. But here's the funny thing about Jehovah's Witnesses. They're creationists, but they're not young earth, right? So God created everything exactly how it is, but he did it billions of years in the past, and,
So what's their version of history?
Well, when creatures enter the evolutionary record, that's not when they evolved into that form. That's when God decided, it's about time to make some lizards. And so he made some lizards then.
I can totally see that.
That sounds...
And after a while, he's like, this planet's kind of boring without humans. Let's make humans now. And that's when humans showed up in the fossil record.
I'm going to say that sounds distinctly less probable than just standard young Earth creationism.
Really?
Because saying...
They don't have to fight against the carbon dating people.
Exactly. They don't have to fight against the fossil record.
Right.
Well, they have to specifically fight against the fossil record because you get transitionary species and you get species in different
there are no transitionary species. Now allow me to correct you before you go any further.
Oh, that's right. Whenever you fill a gap, you just make two more smaller gaps.
Right, yeah. No, so the interesting religion has, I guess, not that much to do with what I was saying. But before I was thinking very much black and white, truth or false. And once I lost my religion and started thinking more, empirically, and I guess more just general liberally, I guess would be the term, because you associate liberalness with this sort of wishy-washy gray area, nothing's quite certain. And I didn't know how to handle that. So I was just like, I guess anything is possible, and I guess everything is equally valid. And so it was just basically everything's just this one shade of gray, and you can't really make any judgments or decisions. And then stumbling across this, the Bayesian thinking, where you can actually put different probabilities on different things and adjust your probabilities as you encounter more evidence. I was like, oh, so I can say with very high certainty that God doesn't exist without having to say things, like there's absolutely no life in the universe or whatever. I guess that has nothing to do with God. Like, I don't have to say there's absolutely no chance Jesus as a historical figure didn't exist in Judea around 30 BC.
So,
and a lot of people seem to be like, either I have to fight for there was a historical Jesus or I have to fight against there was a historical Jesus. I can be like, there's a decent chance that there was some rabbi that went by, not the name Jesus, but was it Yeshua or something? That went by that name, and eventually his legend was transfigured. And there were a lot of messiahs around that time, and I'm sure so you can have these probabilities in your head, and you don't have to be yes or no for one or the other. And it really makes life a lot easier to approach when you admit that your view is uncertain, but you get it as certain as you can.
What you just were talking about makes me think of 2 points. One is that we do all have examples in our lives of times that we transfer knowledge or what we've learned about rationality or even another subject, maybe statistics, maybe something else, where we transfer that to something else in our lives to our benefit, I guess. But I think that what we're lacking is general transference, general and measurable transference. That's not, largely anecdotal.
But that's a skill that can be taught if you keep trying, or can be improved anyway if you keep trying at it, right?
What's your evidence?
I want to say, too, what's evidence is a really good question, because I think it's really hard to tell how good someone is, / how good they're getting, / how much better they are than they were, when it comes to that sort of skill. Like I said, for myself, I think I said last episode was, I try to say, or I tried to not, because I want to say it as often as it's needed, but I want to not need to say, man, I was stupid, every other day. So, but I wanted to say about what you said, Inyash, the switch from binary to Bayesian thinking. And that was what was really interesting. I'm not sure if that came to me before or after Less Wrong, or before, I guess, or during, but I'm not sure. Maybe we're all told everything's binary, or we're kind of pre-programmed that way, that things, this is either true or it's not. But
it makes it easier.
It does. But, but
I guess it makes it much easier to form into coalitions. If you can say, these people are for us, these people are against us, or these people are for this idea or against this idea. And since so much of our history is about forming coalitions.
I think that's probably at least part of the right explanation.
When I went into college and I took a chemistry course, and everything I learned was different from high school chemistry, which before I thought was the absolute real thing. I guess that really threw me for a loop, and everything turned into more shades of gray at that point. But when I learned about Less Wrong and rationality, it was mostly pretty much what I already knew intuitively. And I credited that with growing up always wanting to be a scientist.
Nice.
And, learning science and being immersed in biology and kind of learning what we don't know and what the holes are about our world and what we assume. Yeah. We assume so much that we just take as knowledge, but nobody's ever actually looked into it. So everything just fell in together really easily for me. And the example that I told you guys before we started recording was my husband, Tim. He grew up as a young Earth creationist, and the rest of his family is still young Earth, 8,000 years old, creationist. 8? It's 6 to 8.
Oh, okay.
It's something
they have some wiggle room in there.
It's like October 24th.
Well, there depends who you ask, but there is a guy. Yeah.
Well, there's an established year for a lot of these people, some 6,700 change years.
I don't believe they had an established year, but he said that you know, he got away from young Earth when he took a geology course. And he's like, oh, well, guess that those two things don't square up. And he dropped God. He dropped theism after he took some statistics.
Why statistics?
Because he started to think in terms of probability, I think.
Oh.
We'd have to ask him directly.
Okay.
I can imagine one avenue would be, how do I know which, you know, there are so many gods, what would make me think this one's the right one? You know, my odds are like 1 in 1,000.
I find that convincing. I don't know if that's the way that he went.
I wanted to say really quick that it's interesting when you mentioned that Tim took a geology class and said, wow, my religion's false. Maybe not, you know, after day one or all at once, but he started to question and it, you know, fell apart for him. I'm wondering what discerns people like Tim from people that like I met in college. And I met people like Tim as well, but I met people who go to college. It's probably some of their first time coming into some of these ideas because they're, you know, homeschooled or private schooled, and evolution loses out, geology loses out,
double down.
Loses out. Well, so yeah, but that's the thing, is that it doesn't seem like enough just to give them the information. Tim had some sort of a disposition that allowed him to update in the other direction.
He's a very intelligent person. On his he wrote a little blog about the transfer of learning.
Okay.
And I'm drawing a couple of the things that he suggested, which I don't know that I completely agree with this, but he suggested that intelligent people make connections better.
Okay.
Oh, right. I know. So that, and it's possible that when we as relatively intelligent people think about all the connections that we've made and all of the major changes in opinion, that we've come to in our lives, then based on, you know, our education and rationality or science or whatever, then maybe we're kind of able to do that, and not everyone is. I don't think I agree with him on that necessarily. I think, again, that people are able to update all the time, and that it's
how strong
I think it's probably being in a situation where you have the motivation to update that makes the difference, rather than the intellect to update or the intellect to do that knowledge transfer and draw.
Point.
So I am saying that based on not much.
No, well,
although I believe that I'm sure there is research on knowledge transference and learning transference and motivation. It's just I don't know of it.
Everything is incentive gradients, right? You need some incentive to do this.
And I was nodding when you're illustrating that example about needing an incentive to change or a motivation. And I had a couple thoughts. Well, you can be highly intelligent and still be a devout fundamentalist. You know, like Alvin Plantinga writes papers and books, and he's a philosopher who writes for religious apologists. And he seems like a smart enough guy. But then you really struck a chord when you said that you need the motivation to change. One of our friends, and we should have Autumn on if we ever want to talk about losing your religion.
Well,
so
we've, just out of curiosity, how many here used to be like, you know, very strongly religious and got rid of that?
No.
I was never very strongly religious.
I was always an atheist.
Oh, okay.
Or at least non-religious.
I started out, I was the opposite of Tim, where you said that, you know, he took geology and he's like, oh, well, that's false. Like, I fought with people for years about, you know, evolution and these things. It was eventually just a preponderance of all the evidence in the world, and it broke me down.
I want to meet that Inyash.
Oh my God. I gotta give so many props to this guy. I don't even know his real name, but he was this admin on a BBS that would just chat with me for hours into the night.
That's awesome.
And I was like, how can you not see evolution is such a crock? And yeah, no. I never admitted it to him, because I don't think I changed while, you know, I was still talking with him. But he planted the seed, and over a couple of years it grew.
I think that's how it works for a lot of people. For myself, I don't know how interesting this is, so I'll try and be brief, but I never was very religious. Religious in my family, my parents are both kind of like believe in belief kind of people, although I don't think they know what believe in belief is, but that's sort of how I interpret their behavior. But we never went to church, but it was mainly when I was 13, 14, 15, I guess starting to like actually wake up as an actual human and not being just kind of like a well, I mean, like kids don't really...
Unfair to children.
No.
Fair to children. I'll argue a bit that
children have strong incentives to stick to the beliefs of their parents.
That's true. The scientist
at
children
least up
die
until
quickly.
The what?
The scientist children die quickly. Don't go over there. There's an alligator in that pond.
Allow me to test.
I want to test that, yeah.
Well, not just that,
Oh, kids do that all the time.
Parents support you financially. You have really strong incentives to stay on their good side.
Well, I meant specifically in that my memory of my childhood is very poor, but I don't remember being reflective at all before the age of 13, 14, 15. That's how bad my memory is. Somewhere within give or take 2 years there.
Despite your lack of memory, I think that you probably were. I know I was. And I remember when I was a little girl and I went to my parents and I said, Mommy, Daddy, is there a God?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we don't know.
Oh.
Oh, see, my parents would say yes.
Oh.
My parents said, we don't know. And I went off and became an atheist.
That works.
So
for myself, like I said, it was, and I don't know. I remember being a kid, just to comment on my reflectiveness as a child. I remember doing a lot of things and not really understanding why, or not reflecting hard enough to actually do anything about it. Like I remember listening to the crappy music that my classmates listened to, even though I didn't like it. And I remember thinking, I don't like this, but I'm listening to it because they like it. But it never occurred to me to think one step past that. Maybe that's how a lot of people are. I don't know.
I think I was constantly frustrated as a child, and I actually wrote myself. When I was in first grade, I wrote myself a letter to myself at age 18 saying, you need to treat little kids with respect.
Aww.
You need to listen.
So you kept that letter?
I read it when I was in my late teens and laughed because I was also really concerned that I was going to smoke or do drugs. That was the other part of the letter. To myself was by the way, apparently all teens do this, so according to the teacher, so don't do that.
I was really upset when I realized that I was going to be 20 when the year 2000 came along, and so I would be too mature to go out and enjoy myself.
Oh.
Yeah.
How old were you when you had that thought?
I must have been 9 or 10. I was like, oh man, I'm going to be adult then. I won't know how to party anymore.
Luckily, you radically overestimated the maturity of adults.
Yes.
But, and to be clear, I don't dehumanize
partying
children.
for me at 9 was, having a sleepover in my pajamas.
Hey.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
I don't dehumanize children in the fact that I don't treat them like people. That's I sort of do the opposite. I treat all children like they're basically full-fledged adults. But
so they like you a lot more.
But importantly,
depends on the kid.
Our society as a whole doesn't treat children like people. Otherwise, a kid who picked up his dad's gun and shot his neighbor would be sentenced to life in prison.
Right.
And they're very often not, because they're not deemed responsible for their actions. But what I wanted to say was, and it's a really quick thing, since religion, like I said, was kind of passive in my house. When I first started questioning about it, and I would ask my parents and as like I said, a young teenager, pre-driving age, you could get 2 questions in, and they'd be like, "Well, that's just where faith comes in." And I'm like, "Well, what's faith then?" They're like, "Well, that's just you know." And I can't remember what their answer was, but Richard Dawkins had the answer. Faith is the license people give themselves to believe something after reason fails. And that was their answer, to everything. Like, oh, well, that's just faith. And then I realized that no one had any good answers. I was like, okay, so all the answers suck. So either, anyway, so a little bit after that I dropped it completely. Speaking of Richard Dawkins, I wanted to mention, he had a stroke on Saturday.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I didn't know this until last night, but he's doing pretty well. He's expected to make a full recovery, but that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
It's always a bummer when someone has a stroke.
Agreed. Even if some people aren't fans.
Even if some people are not fans of Richard Dawkins.
Let me...
Especially right now.
Let me only iterate to the audience that if you've only read Richard Dawkins in tweet form, you're not doing him justice.
He doesn't do himself justice in tweet form. Why does he still get on Twitter?
Daniel Dennett has even written to him saying, "Look, I feel like you're ruining your reputation." But read one of his books. I read The God Delusion when I was a teenager, when I was going through all this. And actually, the last chapter basically got me into feminism. I don't know if you read The God Delusion or not, but the whole last chapter is on feminism. And I was, as a kid, I was like, oh, well, things are fine. There's no problems here. I was a kid. No one I saw had any problems. That's what I'm kind of getting at, right?
Yeah.
He raised my consciousness to that issue.
That's great.
Intensely. So
I want to say that I don't know nearly enough about what's going on with Richard Dawkins now, and I don't think I've read any of his works. I just cannot comment on it, and I have no well-formed opinion.
Fair enough. But I will lend you Unweaving the Rainbow, which was one of my favorite books.
Okay.
And he wrote it. It basically is a counter-argument to the idea that science makes the world less interesting. And maybe to bring it back to the podcast, looking at the world rationally makes things less interesting because, where's the magic?
Miracle.
Exactly. Well, did Newton did Newton ruin the rainbow by reducing it to prismatic colors and figuring out how they're generated? Or did he add to it by saying this is how nature generates these things and they're really cool, right? So it's a short book length response to that challenge. So it was very fun.
And, regardless of his whatever political problems he's been in, his things are still he contributed a lot and they're very interesting to read. And, you shouldn't shun him entirely just because he's kind of an asshat.
I tried to have an argument once on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter maybe 5 minutes a year now, but when I first got into it, and somebody was arguing that male circumcision was as big a problem worldwide as female circumcision or female genital mutilation. Mm-hmm. And I challenged, but you can't have an argument in 140 characters.
No.
And after, I don't know, half a dozen of these back and forth, I said, I don't think we're going to be able to communicate effectively. Let's just stop. And I quit responding to him.
Twitter is probably the worst thing ever invented. And I wouldn't go on there because you just cannot say anything meaningful in 140 characters.
I don't know if it's meant to be meaningful.
You can give sound bites and applause lights, and people can be like, yay, or boo, but that's really all you can do.
I got into it because I was attending a conference, and it was a main thing where people could kind of live talk about other things that were going on and stuff, so that was kind of fun.
You have to learn how to use Twitter if you want to use it correctly, and I never took the time to do that. But I follow comedians on there, and I gotta say that they're pretty good at it sometimes.
They sure are.
Yeah.
And Anthony Jeselnik, whenever a tragedy happens worldwide, he says he gets text messages from family members and friends saying, don't. It's on there, and he'll find some way to make it terrible. But
so this is tangential, but how do you guys feel about the whole not judging a work by its author? Because I remember when Ender's Game, the movie, came out, and everyone freaked out because Orson Scott Card is... I'm not sure if he's actually homophobic because I didn't look that much into his, personal...
He totally is.
He is. Okay. Mm-hmm. I know he's a hardcore Mormon, and Mormons are very structurally homophobic or institutionally homophobic. So I figure if he follows that religion, he might be as well. But he is, personally, you said. Okay.
Yes, personally.
But, it doesn't change the fact that Ender's Game itself is a fucking brilliant book.
That was like an awakening book. I loved that. I read it in 6th grade. My piano teacher gave it to me.
Right.
I read it last year. I know, but it was a lot of fun and I liked it. It was great.
Everyone I knew who said they were boycotting the movie, weren't losing anything because they'd already read the book. And I was like, you're not giving anything up.
And they weren't giving anything up because the movie was terrible.
Oh, was it?
Oh, you saw it?
Yeah. Oh, well, if it makes anyone feel better, I didn't pay for it, so.
It makes me feel worse, actually.
Well, I did buy a copy of Ender's Game to read that, so
okay.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So I think there's 2 points. One, you might say, well, his books could be fine, but I refuse to give him money because I disagree with him and how he's spending it or something. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think that people that believe weird or bad things can still be great authors. Apparently, I've never read them, but the Chronicles of Narnia are a great book series for children, and they're written by C.S. Lewis, the Christian apologist.
But he was such a nice person.
Yeah. Oh, maybe he was. I don't know.
Yeah. You can be a Christian apologist, it turns out, and still be a great person.
Well, I meant so I guess great person, insane person, bad person. So whatever the author's disposition is that
you don't like about it.
Or that you want to identify with or support or something, right?
Did you intentionally just reference Lord Liar or Lunatic?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I like that, actually.
All right.
I know what they're talking about.
Was it C.S. Lewis that put forward the Lord Liar or Lunatic?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I only remember that because Christopher Hitchens brought it up once.
Okay.
And
it's an old argument that Jesus either, but when you look at his thing, yeah, he either was the Lord or he was a liar or he was a lunatic. And we can rule out lunatic or liar, so obviously he was the Lord.
He was a lunatic like everyone else.
It's a wonderful argument if you already believe.
It leaves out the hidden alternative of honestly mistaken.
Or legend.
Yeah, that too.
Anything starting with an L.
Right. Or just, some good ideas, some bad ideas, all kind of like humans generally do, mixed up together.
Yes. Where were we?
Oh,
we were talking about authors. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that...
is there a limit? Because if Hitler, was still alive and in a prison somewhere, would it be okay to buy Mein Kampf to see what he said?
Apparently the book is terrible, and it's like the ravings of a child.
But it has a great deal of historic value, right?
Apparently.
I was actually thinking about this recently because I was reading a modern anthology And, all female writers, lots of minority authors. And one of the authors was somebody who had been called out by the writing community for some really nasty behavior, right?
Okay.
And she is alive and still writing. Mm-hmm. And I got to her piece in the anthology, and I saw the name and I stopped for a moment. And I'm like, if I do read this, how do I read it? Do I read it, completely separate from a knowledge of who this author is? Or how does that figure in? And it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
It's kind of confusing. I think that with creative people, we give them a lot of license to be quirky. And we let ourselves consume what they create, if they're topically Kanye West, or
who I've heard is an amazing artist.
You haven't
terrible
heard
person.
His stuff?
No, I've heard from a lot of people that listen to rap that he's really freaking good at what he does, and they're sad that he sucks so much as a person.
So they should enjoy it. Just like, when I was kind of sad that Christian Bale said some mean things because I like his acting.
Oh, that's actually a great example. So Mel Gibson, when he made an ass of himself,
right? I
can still enjoy Braveheart.
I think you should still enjoy Braveheart.
Well, no. I mean, this is not because I don't really know that many authors that are bad people that I've read their books, but I'm trying to think. It's like I enjoy some of the movies that spy guy, Mission Impossible. Well, I can't think. Tom Cruise. I enjoy some of his movies, but I remember specifically thinking when Mel Gibson went off the rails that I was like, you know what? I'm not a fan of Mel Gibson, but I'm a fan of William Wallace. So like because if he makes money off the movie, he's gonna make. I think they make money enough anyway. It's kind of like I get the idea of not supporting it, but whatever. Right. I don't know if I ever bought that movie either. So for what that's worth.
But and this is a real life example. What if you really enjoy ice cream, and your local ice cream shop is owned by a confirmed racist person? You wouldn't want to support them by going and buying ice cream there and enjoying that product of their labor.
Are they actively racist, or just like they're racist on the inside and whatever, but like
do they not serve minorities in their store?
They don't hire minorities.
So
actively racist.
Fair enough. Well, so I'm trying to think of there was that nationwide example of Chick-fil-A where the major owners donated tons in anti-gay charities. And I did boycott Chick-fil-A for that reason. Although I have eaten there.
I boycotted Chick-fil-A because they serve chicken.
Right. And I agree with you sentimentally. We need to talk on that.
I have taken to heart the argument that if we start patronizing businesses based on the politics of the people who own them, then we will really just kind of have all the businesses we can go to and divide the nation more into red and blue, and there's no real good reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean specifically their politics. I meant specifically that apparently some fraction of my spending money there would go towards anti-gay charity.
Right, but it's the same situation that Eneasz is talking about.
Some fraction of money that I make was going to go to causes that other people probably don't like. And yet, do I want them to never buy anything that I make or not hire me?
Also, we all pay taxes.
Right. What if my employer is a right-leaning Republican, but technically my employer is a right-leaning Republican, and he would be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're too liberal, you can't have a job as an accountant. I'd be like, what the hell does my liberalism have to do with my accounting work? It's like, I don't know, this is just the way things run now. We only patronize people with the same politics as us.
But that's a different, that's moving the goalpost a bit, because they're talking about hiring people as opposed to people shopping at your company. Right?
Yeah, but they're paying him.
Yeah, they're paying me for my labor as opposed to me paying them for their chicken.
Well, them saying they won't serve you, or that your employer's hypothetically saying we won't hire you, is different than you saying I won't work for you, which is the choice you make as a consumer. I won't buy from you. Not Chick-fil-A saying we won't serve gays.
I gotta say,
right.
They never said that, and then
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. They're two completely different points.
Yeah. I'm inclined. I'm convinced after our little discussion here that we should enjoy what we enjoy.
I'm still sort of on the fence.
Unless Chick-fil-A was saying we don't serve gays, then you should definitely not
Yeah,
go there.
like maybe it depends on how intense they are.
Which they didn't
you know,
say.
So like, but I did want to say I have eaten a Chick-fil-A in the last year because they lost the gay war thing, or the gay rights war, and I'm not sure what their next thing is, but I'm like, well, you know, if you guys want to keep donating to that, whatever, but you already lost.
It's the weirdest
so.
thing. I don't have anything against Chick-fil-A on a philosophical level, but I don't go out to eat when I'm alone. If I'm alone, I'll grab whatever I have in the fridge. And whenever I'm out and about, I'm with someone else. I'm like, oh, I don't want to go into Chick-fil-A with this person right next to me. They'll judge me.
And that's maybe why
So yeah, it's the social pressure that keeps me out.
I've done so much solo driving lately that I think maybe that's why I've finally succumbed, because other drive-through places are getting old.
Yeah.
But
and they really do make good chicken.
It occurs to me that we're getting really far off.
Yeah, actually,
Right.
I was thinking about the original topic and something that Ines said earlier about, assigning probabilities, and after, reading a series of blogs that he found entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a survey of people who use less wrong, and I think that the results of that were that there was no difference in calibration ability between people who use less wrong and people who didn't, who are not members of less wrong.
That's discouraging.
Is that so?
Or encouraging.
We are all bad at calibration, at these calibration exercises.
Although calibration exercises, I think, are not quite the same thing as what we're discussing in terms of raising the sanity waterline, because I think calibration is a slightly higher level skill. Whereas we're talking about really, really basic things, like make everyone in the world every now and then think, just as in the back of their mind, what do I know and why do I think I know it?
So,
I mean, the basic question of rationalism, right, is why do I believe what I believe?
There's a great analogy to be made here between rationality as a skill and martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so like if you're great at calibration, that could be like the equivalent of you being able to punch through a board. But that's not the same thing as being good at martial arts. And so you might be a really good fighter, but you're all Krav Maga and, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's not about breaking boards. So, do you see what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
Yes, we need more research is what you're saying.
That too. But I do like the analogy in that, it sucks because we can't just put everything on hold until we conduct more research. Because, the research is currently being done, but it's taking a while, as it should, because it's being done, I think, properly. But in the meantime, we don't want to just hold off on all discussion until the results come in, because they're doing results on these kinds of things. So.
Well, and I think you mentioned previously, not while we were recording this episode, that there's a lot of, that people feel like it's making a difference in their lives. There's anecdotal reports that learning rationality makes a difference. And I can, again, and we can all report anecdotally that I could say I went to my job in marketing and got in a fight with my boss about whether a study was robust enough to quote or something like that, because I'm coming from a science background. So we know that we can transfer knowledge anecdotally, and we know that it makes people feel better too if they, I guess, and we have a feeling that if people have the motivation, that they can transfer what they learn about rationality to other parts of their lives.
I think they could, yeah.
I think it does need to be that push moment where you finally start trying to use what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people that just doesn't come because things are pretty relaxed, and, you have enough of a community that you don't need to, so like, I'm imagining that in some circles, being young Earth creationist is like awesome.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So, but if I were to come out as a young Earth creationist, my friend group would look at me like I just came out as a Holocaust denier, So there's no pressure for some people whose society or social circles anyway are already cool with them being the way they are to bother changing.
Yeah. I'm thinking about Tim's family in Eastern Tennessee, where everybody pretty much believes the same way that they believe. They're surrounded with messaging that confirms their beliefs and confirms that their society believes the same way they believe. And it would be incredibly difficult to take somebody who's so comfortable out of bed, I guess, and put them somewhere else.
And
think
you'd be hard pressed to coerce them to get themselves out of bed and go somewhere else.
Yes.
I think if you just get people to care enough about figuring out how things actually are and making sure that their map is as close to reality as they can get it, then the rest will shake out naturally.
That's an interesting point, and there's a good counterexample, but I wanted to raise one thing first, is that a lot of people just don't really care.
Yeah.
It's weird. I even people that I'm really close with, they're just like, that's just not really my thing. I'm happy and I'm right, and
I've never really understood how to get past the motivation problem. If someone just doesn't care, what do you do?
I have no idea.
Let them not care?
Yeah.
But what if you want to share with them all the cool stuff you like?
Right.
Well, I mean, I recently met somebody like that, and I was talking about, this and that, and this incorrect belief, and this new thing, and he just said, yeah, I don't care about that. I am a simple guy. And the result was I was like, I am probably not going to go on another date with you.
Right.
Maybe the difference between people like that is that simple to him is a compliment, and to others it's not.
I think that gets us to the second part of the question being, should we try to raise the sanity waterline?
Oh, I wanted to raise an example, though, about having...
Your counterexample?
Well, once you have a desire to, I guess, apply Bayesian thinking and map territory distinctions to the real world, wasn't the creator of Aumann's agreement theorem, or Aumann's, however you say his last name, wasn't he a Jehovah's Witness or a fundamentalist or something?
I don't know.
Let me check.
I think he may have been a fundamentalist. I don't think that he was a Jehovah's Witness, though. Although I could be wrong. I mean, I'm thinking if he was, then we would have told us.
Jehovah's Witness?
Well, I knew Michael Jackson was Jehovah's Witness, I guess.
I just learned that Michael Jackson was a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah. I just learned that right this second.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Oh, okay.
The second
But on the other hand, he's like a celebrity, so that would probably be brought up more often than someone no one's ever heard of. Well, not no one, but someone that most people in my church wouldn't have heard of. Everyone had heard of Michael Jackson.
Yeah, it's true. So while you're looking up whatever you're looking up, Stephen.
Couldn't find it.
Okay. I was thinking the should we question.
Yes.
That harkens back to that 7% of whatever kind of scientist that Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about. And if they're doing good work, bless their hearts. They can believe whatever the heck they want. That's how I feel.
I would feel that way if I thought that was possible. So like Francis Collins, the director of the National Institute of Health, appointed by Barack Obama as young Earth creationist.
Mm-hmm.
And
wait, young Earth?
A lot of
okay.
A lot of health people are.
But it's weird because he's the director of the NIH. So like it would be fine if he was going to be a health nut on his own little blog.
Right, but he's actually pretty good as the director of health.
He does a pretty good job.
He doesn't let that interfere with his science.
Well, in his presentations, he comes right out and challenges evolution, and so I would
not a very good role model.
Well, so I worry about the health decisions that someone like that might make, regarding
a rapidly evolving pandemic spreading across the states,
virus epidemiology or something, right? Yeah. So, once we vaccinate it, it'll be fine. In 100% of people all the time, because it can't possibly change.
Well,
but
he clearly doesn't think that
people
who are anti-evolution generally believe in microevolution. Right. This applies to Tim's extended family.
Yes.
So, Tim's, I guess, immediate family. So, they can still do things like fight pandemics.
So, look, I'll be generous to Collins then, and let's pretend that he does that all of his, and I guess I'm not sure. So let's set as given then that his science is sound as often as the best atheist scientist. Then I wonder what is going on in his head that makes him so confident in his religion while at the same time being a great scientist. In his book, he talks about seeing he is on a retreat to find himself spiritually, and he saw a frozen waterfall frozen into 3 separate paths.
And was there a rainbow?
Probably.
Double rainbow.
But the thing is that the frozen waterfall said the triple stream frozen waterfall spoke to him of the Trinity, and then he says he fell to his knees, accepted Jesus into his heart.
Wow.
And so, but I'm wondering about that because, and I think Sam Harris said that if a frozen waterfall can prove the divinity of or the truth of Christianity, then anything can prove anything.
Right. Well, I mean, that obviously wasn't his true reason.
But he had a spiritual experience, I guess.
Right.
But a lot of us have those anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us don't attribute things that can't be attributed to them.
Right.
So
I think that's actually one of the good reasons to want to raise the sanity waterline, because I don't know if we all have, but I've had spiritual experiences before.
Sure.
Yeah, but you can interpret them in light of, oh, okay, this is probably what's actually happening, as opposed to, oh God, there's actually aliens behind me, which was my case. Or
there were actually aliens behind you.
There were. It was amazing. Oh, well, it was. Do you really want to know?
yeah.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
This was back when I was still smoking, and I was out on the porch at a friend's house, way after dark, having a cigarette, and I was the only one out there, and this light came on behind me, and it was just over the rooftop, so I couldn't see the source, but it looked exactly like a UFO was about to come over. And I was like, oh my God. And I totally had this flush, this absolute certainty that there were aliens and UFOs, and I was going to get taken right now, or if I wasn't, something else was going to happen with aliens. And that didn't happen, but still the whole time I was like, okay, I know there's aliens right behind me watching me, but the entire time in my head I was like, but I know what's actually causing this is nothing to do with real aliens, the probability of aliens showing up just now, and, all the other things that go through your head, your priors of how extremely unlikely this is, and what evidence am I actually seeing? Oh, just a bright light, and so forth, where I was able to dismiss that this deep emotional reaction within me feels really cool, but it has nothing to do with what is actually happening in the world behind me.
To bring children up again, we've all been children. And I think
can neither confirm nor deny that.
Yeah. You were just talking. You don't remember your childhood pre-12 years old, apparently.
That's why he can't
Stephen.
confirm or deny.
Perfect.
But we've all been kids, and I had a really realistic dream one night, and I was convinced that there were ghost flamingos living in our attic.
Awesome.
But then later I realized that couldn't have happened because I was way too much of a scaredy cat to go to the attic at night on my own, so I wouldn't have gone there in the first place to see the ghost flamingos.
Damn.
That's how I just proved that one.
You used meta-knowledge as a kid. That's fantastic.
But we've all had those experiences that I think aren't as common for most people as we go into adulthood, as we develop more priors, right? Mm-hmm. As we have more evidence in our lives. But we can still remember how things used to be, and I think conceive that we might be going through something similar, right?
I think I'm working with a different definition of spiritual experience than the ones you guys described, because
I've had, I was raised a Unitarian Universalist, and I have had very spiritual experiences while sitting in the sanctuary at midnight while somebody rang a gong.
Sure.
I've had incredibly meaningful, deep, moving experiences in Tierra del Fuego watching a glacier calve while South American parakeets were flying by. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's closer.
In addition to, I guess what I was talking about, which was more of a supernatural experience.
Okay, yes, that's the distinction I was thinking of. Like a spiritual experience, I can imagine, or I can remember times, and I can kind of put myself in the right mindset and sort of generate them, not whenever I want, but with a little effort, more or less whenever I want. And, I can go outside, look at the stars, think about, and I can just think of the path from light like that to the atoms in our bodies to, the long chain of evolution that led to us being here. To me, that's deeply profound, and what I can only imagine is similar to what people talk about when they talk about spiritual experiences. I'm trying to remember any supernatural experiences I ever had. I remember I went along with a lot of them when I was a kid. My friends they would say they saw ghosts, and I pretend that I did too, to agree with them. Mm-hmm. But I can't remember.
Or you even imagine that you might have, if enough people said that they saw it.
I don't remember ever actually believing. I knew I was lying to myself the whole time. I knew I was lying to them the whole time. But I would play along without spoiling the fun. Unless there was some time when I was younger that I can't remember. But, yeah.
You know why I personally think we should raise the sanity waterline if possible?
Why or what?
Yeah, why? Like, as a selfish reason why. Because, obviously, all last episode we were talking about how it makes your own life better if you can be rational because you have a better grasp of the world and, how you can change it and alter your surroundings. But as a selfish reason why I think it'd be a good reason to raise the sanity waterline overall in the world is because we are an incredibly interconnected species nowadays. I guess we always have been, but it's gotten ridiculous how much we all depend on each other nowadays to survive or to do anything meaningful. And in that case, a lot of life comes down to iterated prisoner's dilemma type situations or coordination problems with other people. And the more rational the people that you're coordinating with, the better allies you have. Just not even allies, coworkers, people, that you have to rely on. If they're more rational, things just work better in general. You can count on them more. You can, put more trust in what they're doing.
They have to be rational in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing if there's a tragedy of the commons problem, right? If there's a fisheries problem, the religion of the people involved is not really going to matter.
Right.
But there are, other ways in which they need to be rational in order to work with you, right?
Yeah, that's the kind of rationality I mean, mainly. Like religion, people can be religious, and that's fine with me as long as it doesn't adversely affect the world, but I would still like them to be slightly more rational.
And with the analogy of the waterline specifically involves the fact that people can, like Francis Collins, can exist, shows that there's some deeper problem there, right?
Yeah.
I think getting rid of the Francis Collinses of the world is a different task than getting rid of the Ken Hams, right?
I don't like the term getting rid of individual people.
I would like that's why I use
We don't
plural.
want to knock them off.
No,
Yes.
let me be perfectly clear. That's why I used plural on both of them, and then I realized too that I was kind of stuck with it after I already said it. So,
yeah. More like the method of thinking that leads to that sort of
absolutely,
okay.
Yeah, no,
mindset.
and I'm absolutely not for in any way quote unquote getting rid of these people. So let me just put that on the record.
Although I do think that Ham's a butt.
Yes,
I think so too. I tried to watch the Ham on Nye debate, and I told myself going in I'm going to watch the whole thing, and I couldn't. I started skipping and just watching Bill Nye's segments. But I did give it an honest effort. But every thing out of that guy's mouth was, well, we have a book that has that in there.
and it didn't really matter who he was talking. You get the feeling that no matter who he was talking against, it would have been the exact same speech.
It probably is the exact same speech.
Yeah,
every time
he
talks about
ignored his opponent and then comes out and just does his own spiel. Wow.
Yeah.
Way to not get what a debate is about.
So, well, that's what I think.
What he got out of it, what Ham got out of it was actually quite a bit of funding and attention. So I think that
and getting to be on the same stage as Bill Nye, so he gets some,
That
rub
status,
off.
yeah.
get some cred.
Yeah,
Man, people must be taking him pretty seriously if Bill Nye himself is going to argue with this guy, right?
right.
Yeah, I think that happened.
That was all the discussion leading up to it.
That's why, like, Richard Dawkins doesn't take debates anymore, or at least depending on the topic, but he doesn't argue religion anymore for that reason. Cause
Who I really miss?
Hitch?
Yes.
God damn.
He was so good.
There was, I wanted to mention, speaking of Hitch, that reminded me of...
Just because watching him, like, in a debate was watching, like, a boxer, someone who really knows how to fight. And, even if he doesn't necessarily make the best points, just his delivery was so artistic. You just loved watching him argue. Be like, you know what, Hitch? For this next argument, I want you to argue the young Earth creationist position. Go. And I would still come out rooting for him because of the way he delivered things.
Hey, listeners, if we have any,
Yeah.
funny backstory here. We were talking about how we didn't want this to be a skeptics or anti-religion podcast.
Well, we can bring it to more challenging issues, right?
Yeah.
Because like that's
It's easy.
Once again,
Low-hanging fruit.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So with skepticism, again, like I said, it's great rationality 1 point, or like maybe 0.5, I don't know, but it's I think it's the easier version of rationality. Their one thing is what's a reasonable standard for evidence. If you had to narrow it down to one sentence. And the rationality thing is, what do I know and what do I think I know and how do I think, what do I think I know and why do I think I know it?
Yeah.
But speaking of Hitch, there's a British writer named Douglas Murray who has a lot of the same zeal and isn't afraid to say hard things like Hitch's, and he's worth checking out. Sam Harris interviewed him on his podcast recently, or they had a dialogue rather. It's not really an interview show.
Yeah.
For me, there are selfish reasons, I guess, to, be around saner people. But I mean, that's sort of what I do anyway, and I already do that. So I satisfy that need basically just by only going, not reading YouTube comments and setting up less wrong meetups. Mm. But globally, I guess it's the opposite of selfish, but it works for me too. everybody stands to benefit if the waterline goes up.
I also assume that we are going to, at some point in the not too terribly distant future, reach, greatly expanded lifespan, possibly functional immortality. And at that point, God, there's so many things. It really annoys me when people are like, oh, well, that idea is fine. Just all its proponents will die off and the new generation will take over. Racism, homophobia, things like that. And I'm like, that is not good enough because soon people will stop dying and we need to have some way to update our beliefs. That's what rationality gives us, is the ability to change our minds when we find out we're wrong.
Right. And I think
that's an incredibly important skill for everyone to have, especially as we reach much longer lifespans.
And the people that have the wrong ideas dying is one way for the problem to kind of go away, but it's, I think, not the best way.
No.
What would be better, is for them...
almost as, a excuse to start killing people off that have the bad ideas.
Right. It's one big step away, but it's on that path, right? So... but what would be better is if they change their mind and lived the rest of their lives, however long it was, 10 years left or, 100 or 10 billion years left as saner people.
Yeah.
But my thing is that there is a good deal of...
Oh, shit.
Have we not been recording?
No, we're good. I stepped
okay.
on the computer, but it's fine.
All right.
Also, how long have we been recording?
We should wrap it up, actually.
Let's do.
Yeah.
All right. That sucks. We didn't really...
I know.
Talk that much about
I wanted to get more into this.
Well, maybe we'll
not get as tangentially off track.
I enjoyed it.
I did too, quite a bit.
I had fun.
I guess we could come back to this topic at some later point.
I think a good topic for next week might be ways to actually do it, because there are some fun ways that I wanted to bring up that I used to.
Not next week, but next episode.
Right. Excuse me. Next episode, 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
That I use when I don't really have any sacred cows. Maybe you two can have fun trying to find one of my beliefs that I hate talking about because I don't want it to be wrong, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like talking about those things.
Mm-hmm.
But there are strategies to engage on those for things people don't like talking about.
I think that's another great technique of rationality, that when you find out you're wrong about something, you don't view it as a failure. You view it as you just got stronger. Like, my map is now better.
Or you should try to view it that way.
Yeah.
It can be really
hard.
tough. It can be tough to not just feel terrible about being wrong.
Right.
Yeah, no, and sometimes it's double-sided, right? You realize that, well, this PhD program that I've been into, that I've been on the trajectory for the last 7 years, this isn't going to do it. I'm dropping out, So, that's going to be kind of a, there are pros and cons, ending a relationship or whatever it could be, right? So,
Let's talk about that next time.
No, we should talk about that in 2 episodes from now.
Okay.
Because next episode, we are going to interview Eliezer Yudkowsky.
Ooh.
Really? Are we bringing this up right now?
Yes.
Are we there yet? I guess we have to be.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I'm going to talk with you guys about this right after that, but yeah.
Well, all right. Stay tuned next week, or excuse me. Stay tuned in 2 weeks for our interview with Eliezer Yudkowsky.
What? Oh, and a shout out on the very off chance that this person is listening. If you were a sysadmin on the DS9 BBS in the 90s by the name of Captain Picard, I owe you so much and you rock.
Katrina, any sign off?
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody!
Thanks for listening.